a lot of our culture is linked to adapting to our surroundings, as you briefly mentioned earlier. For example, our architecture here in Kuwait, if we go back to a few generations, the way our houses were built, they made it so there's like this natural air conditioning. The way they built the houses, and there was a natural flow from water, so the water wouldn't pile up on top. And there are certain things where the architecture was built to, I guess, withstand the different, environmental, limitations we had. But like nowadays, because if we turned off the AC for half an hour, like the air would, stop circulating, sometimes even bad smells and things like that. But if we go back to our old architecture, we wouldn't have that same problem. So I think it is important to link going forward with a bit of the past. And I think if Kuwait wishes to successfully move forward, I think having a strong hold to our culture from the past while still having an open view to the future is very important to have that balance. Because if we try to assimilate a culture that isn't ours, the same adaptations that they progress with aren't applicable here.
Exactly. I think you put it really well. That basically we need to reconnect to our predicament. I was reading somebody who was saying that the Gulf cannot escape its climactic predicament. We are the hottest spot. Some people say Kuwait is the hottest country in the world. There are two hot cities, and one is Ahvaz, one is Kuwait, where the temperature reaches 50 degrees the most consecutive number of days a year. We cannot escape that. Right now we are shielding it with AC, but should we not be thinking about it as an opportunity to be a leader? I mean, if you're missing water, then your thinking should be, well, how can I avoid that, right? So in the old days, people used to build irrigation systems, dams, right? Anything to catch the water. Today, when it rains, nobody thinks of that, not that it rains often. The same thing with heat. If we look at our climate as an opportunity to develop, then it changes the way you look at it. You stop bringing people from outside to build these glass towers, which make no sense environmentally in a place like Kuwait. Really no sense. Because they consume a lot of AC, they're not directed against the wind, they really don't lead much to the architectural style of the country. We should bring technology from outside in terms of helping us think, but at the end of the day, we should be in control of what our architecture is, how we live our lives.
So, if I can jump in, I think you both bring up a good point about what is the purpose and how the culture, how do you preserve it, what are some of the benefits in terms of architecture, art, identity. I want to bring up some of the possible negative aspects and just throw it out to discuss, because it also raises questions about who gets to define which aspects of tradition and culture continue. How do people find one another? As we're talking about tribes, for example, certain families of the which traditions seem to get preferenced? What about traditions for Shia versus Sunni? Things like this. And right now it looks to me like the biggest steward, you might say, of preserving culture in Kuwait is the government. But then the government also has sort of a sanitized and almost commodified way of showing culture. And in many ways, when you start thinking about tradition and how different societies try and embrace what they feel is a disappearing culture, a lot of times it is to turn it into either a spectacle for tourists or to turn it into something that you can market and sell as a sort of local cultural item. So I just want to also throw out some of these negative aspects about how culture is sort of retooled and redefined for the purposes of certain groups over other groups and some of the things that
I agree with you, and culture evolves. It's not stagnant. It's like yeast, it keeps on growing. And I think that if there's a vacuum in terms of what kind of culture will help us develop, it all depends, right? What is it that you want in the long term? Do you want to develop or do you want to regress? So I think I think the negative comes in when you're not sure where you want to go, where your priorities aren't straight, when you're depending on one resource. And I think That's where you say the government is in control of culture, but it isn't. It is in control of trying to show us one kind of culture behind museums, folkloric events. But if you're really into culture, then you would sift and distill our environment and what are the real issues that are affecting Kuwait, and then translate them at the policy level, which they're not able to do. They're not able to think that way because they don't want to. It's much easier for them when they do a call for proposals to say we want the best architect from England to come and do a building, right? Or to say we don't care what the factory, whether it meets environmental protection. But that's why I think it might be able to showcase what they think is artifacts, but they're not actually protecting culture. They're actually ruining our culture.
Well, I sometimes slightly doubt whether you can really say that Kuwait is losing some of its heritage more than other countries, at least, because for instance, when you go to Japan, I mean, Japan is all modern buildings. You have temples left, you have some old buildings, but you don't really you could say that they've lost a lot of their heritage, much in the same way one would say Kuwait has. But Japanese people wouldn't say that, and most people who go to Japan would distinctly see that this is Japan, this is not a westernized country that used to be Japan. And much in the same way, I feel that when we look at the heritage of Kuwait, we tend to overemphasize the nomadic Arab aspect of Kuwait. And I think that Kuwait, as we see it today, with the many expat communities, all the foreigners who live here, all the people who, well, some are well integrated, some are not so well integrated. But I think that Kuwait today is much more in continuation of what Kuwait used to be than we tend to think. It's easy to focus on the superficial aspects of, now we have tall glass buildings. Before it was, shorter mud houses. But I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I just...
No, what you're saying is definitely right. I actually find the ironic thing is that cultures that have more of a xenophobic tinge to them, those that are sort of anti-foreigners, like I remember reading somewhere that Japan had a word for foreigners that also meant ghosts or vampires back in the day. Yeah, and a lot of we can think about a lot of cultures as being particularly xenophobic. China cut off trading to the West in the 19th and 18th centuries and barely reopened them in the 20th century, and that's why China is sort of more, we would say, independent. So the irony here is that cultures that are more intolerant of other cultures tend to preserve more. This is a trend that I'm sure each of us can come to the same conclusion of, examining different cultures. It's dangerous to say, find that there's at least a ring of truth to it. What I also wanted to say is that, in regards more to what Dr. Khan was saying, the government, I kind of agree with you, the government and multiple governments around the world attempt to portray a unified cultural identity, mostly in the Ministry of Tourism or its equivalent globally. And definitely, when you visit a country, you want to have an idea for what it is. It's not necessarily an evil thing. It's just something that is prone to creating misrepresentation. A government can't really properly represent the culture. That is something that is created by societies and communities. And cultural is something that I believe is sort of an unconscious, like you said, evolution. And we're with globalization as it is today, we're kind of adding a sort of exponential conscious growth onto something that we've been experiencing for the last million years as an unconscious development. So I find that marriage to be, yes, maybe a little dangerous, but ultimately quite interesting.
Very well said.
Do you want to say something?
I was very surprised that so many times you brought architecture up. And I think that's because many times architecture is one of the visual manifestations of culture. And about the glass towers, for me they are also a huge shock when I came to Kuwait. So I tend to agree with you in the way that some things are gone and some things stay. For example, the distance. it's for me completely amazing that we kept that. But one of the problems, as I've been trying to build for Kuwait, or at least make projects for it, is that what we think we want to do here in terms of culture and getting what used to be done, clients don't want that. And for me, they almost never want that because they are attached to an image, the image of a particular house, a particular building, some green, a lot of glass. And I think that's a problem of identity. And when I say a problem, I mean an opportunity. Because I disagree that when you don't know where you are, that's a problem. I think that's a good thing. At least I was taught that way. So basically, when you're in trouble, you go get your identity. And if you are ever in trouble, you get there again. Whatever happens, no matter how much time passes. That's it.
I want to pick up on something you said about the national dress, because having a national dress here, whether it's the men's distasha or the women's abaya and the dra, there is a cost due. And I think, was I saying to you about the national dress? So I got invited to the British Embassy, and on it says formal or national dress. And I said to Hamad, and he said, well, what's your national dress? And I don't have one. Like, if I go back through British history, there's hundreds of different dresses for women, like in so many different styles, and a lot of them look really uncomfortable. And I said to him, no, they mean like the national dress for here, because I'm in Kuwait, like it's a British Embassy, but I'm going here. He's like, oh, okay, and that for me is really a big part. It's another visual part, as well as architecture, the dress. And it's so interesting that, and it makes sense in a lot of ways. As well as architecture, you define yourself by how you look, part of your heritage, and again, short term and long term is how you dress. How you dress is a big thing about you. If you dress in jeans and a t-shirt, or if you're dressing in heels, like it says quite a lot about you how you choose to dress. And I think that's quite a significant part of the culture here, and a part of the culture that I don't see will ever disappear. Distasha shops certainly aren't closing down. In fact, I'd say more and more opening up. Beit Kandura in the Emirates is a fairly new, it's an online Kandura shop. So Kandura being the Emirati word for distasha. So it's not just local to Kuwait, it's to the whole region. And it's certainly something that is not dying out at all. Like, if anything, the distasha is becoming more and more and more popular. And you're seeing it in even fashion designers. They're experimenting with the cut, the tailoring. I met with a Bahraini fashion blogger the other day who actually takes his old distashas that he has finished with as a distasha, and he has them tailored up to here and turns them into a t-shirt. And they look awesome. And he's like, yeah, I don't understand why more people aren't doing it. Like, he's had them custom made. Why throw it away when it's finished as a distasha? And I love that there's a lot of people reimagining and rethinking the identity, but in a way that isn't losing it.
Actually,